I started grad school a few years ago, and it kept me from my friends and family for months on end. I developed a pretty serious sense of homesickness, and the summer break between semesters, which was only 10 days, was much needed. It was great catching up with my parents, but what I looked forward to most was exploring the night with my friend Jess. Jess and I had explored the Michigan countryside and cities late at night since we were kids, and we're always out on adventures. Naturally, we had heard all about the Randonautica app, with its bizarre findings in recent weeks. She lived fairly deep in the woods in a small cabin her parents used to own. We decided to celebrate our reunion by trying it out ourselves. Together, we set up a location and shouted out our focus at the same time. Naturally, being a bit twisted myself, I shouted death. And predicting my thoughts, Jess decided to be smart and contradict me by yelling, "Babies!" She's a strange, generally happy-go-lucky kind of girl. The location was 15 minutes away in the next town over. And if you know anything about living in a small country town, you know that there's always an even smaller, more country town that you make fun of for being inferior. That's where we were headed, which caused both of us to be a bit unnerved, but I'll explain that more in a moment. Since neither of us wanted to look weak, we decided to head out to our destination at midnight. We had been drinking, so we opted out of driving and cut across the street through the woods on foot. The area I lived in was the meeting place of two major rivers, and it was hard to go anywhere without crossing a bridge or running water, so naturally most roads ran parallel to it. We followed the banks with a nervous excitement and both whispered quietly as if something scary had already happened. Naturally, I had to ask about the bizarre incident I had heard about while I was away. In that small town, just a month prior, there was a fairly televised news story on a grisly murder. It was big news in the area. It was a small town, a 2-block main street with small businesses that hadn't been renovated since the 40s, with a lone gas station at one end, and a bridge over the river leading to the ice cream shop which had been out of business for years. The surrounding suburbs were sparse because of the water, a few lined up houses here and there with a mile or two between the next set. The homes themselves were typically narrow, 2-story homes with bright colors, built in the 50s, and well known to be common places to buy meth. At one such house, there was a small explosion, prompting an immediate police response. Inside, one wounded man was arrested, and a dead body was found. The wounded man was terribly burnt, but upon autopsy, it was determined the other man's cause of death was dozens of stab wounds. After hazmat crews cleared the volatile chemicals from the area and inspected the home more thoroughly, a disturbing sight was found. Bible verses were carved into the walls, focusing on hell, upside-down crosses, 6s written in blood, and other incomprehensible symbols. The wounded man was a religious fanatic on hard drugs, convicted of murder and distribution. Jess told me, rumor had it that he had followers in the area still. It was fairly disturbing to hear, but I'm a rational guy. There wasn't anything paranormal. Some guy went crazy, hopped up on meth and killed someone. It was done and over. The very real thought of drugged out crazies in the area was concerning though, and admittedly I was on edge for the rest of the walk. By the time we reached town, I was too focused on the coordinates of our destination to dwell on it. We cut through the last bit of woods and past a few homes, veering down the main street by the gas station. I needed a drink of water bad. I had celebrated a little too hard and went to walk inside. As I pulled the door handle though, everything went black. It was 12:43 a.m., and an odd time to have timed lights shut things down, but I couldn't rationalize it any other way. Not only was it inside the station, but the lights under the awning over the pumps, and the sign on the street as well. Jess and I did our best to shake it off, but the timing couldn't have been more uncomfortable. We headed down the road towards a small set of neighboring homes towards our destination. A small bridge, maybe 7 feet high, crossed over a tributary from the river, and we peered over the edge. There was an object down below I could faintly see, but it was too dark to confirm. And I whispered to Jess to shine the flashlight from her phone, and I'd try to snap a picture. That way we could at least decide if it was worth the trouble of climbing down. As the light clicked on, though, my attention was caught by a dingy-looking man in a faded gray flannel jacket with holey jeans. He was walking down below with a black garbage bag draped over his shoulder. The man looked up at us, dropping the bag and shouting, "You stay right there," and began to scurry towards the sloped bank up towards the road. Jess and I immediately ran past the old set of homes down the unlit gravel road. I could vaguely see that he was trailing behind at a steady pace, and knew eventually he would catch us. I was holding back on my sprint though to keep Jess beside me. And as we came to the set of homes, I pulled Jess with me into a nearby yard, and we scurried over a small, decrepit chain link fence. We bolted through the yards behind until we found a small shed where we dropped to the ground for cover. I could feel my heart pounding in my head, and attempted to slow my breathing as I squinted my eyes in the darkness, watching as the silhouette of the man peered over fences and into windows. Jess held her hand over her mouth and tears streamed down her cheeks. It seemed like an eternity, but eventually the man wandered back down the road. We took a moment to compose ourselves as we regained our feet and silently stepped through the series of backyards. We knew the woods wouldn't be too much further where we could cut back to the river and head home. But something caught Jess's eye and she stopped. With an outstretched hand, she raised a finger, pointing to the back of the nearest house where visible scorch marks could be seen in the moonlight. We both stared, a bit unnerved, even awestruck. I thought I heard her say something when she clutched my arm. A firm, even uncomfortable squeeze snapped me out of my daze to realize the sound I had heard wasn't from Jess. I looked beside the house to see an old woman in a wooden chair, staring at us from the porch. She never moved, but in the most shrill voice, shouted over and over, "Get out! Get out!" We had no idea who she was, or why she was there, or if she was attempting to alert the pursuer from before. We just ran. We ran the whole way back home through the woods and never looked back. After Jess took a quick cry and I got some much needed water, we eventually sat down back home. Neither of us said a word for some time, until Jess broke and asked me what was in the picture. I had totally forgot at that point. It was still dim, despite her flashlight. A box, maybe? Jess whimpered loudly. It's padded. Is it a coffin? It's too small, I said. Then I peered closer, and she was right. It was padded and hinged, but much too small for a person, or at least an adult. My heart skipped a beat. I prayed it was a messed up burial for a dog or a cat. But we're quite sure now. It was a coffin for an infant. I guess both of our focuses were right that night.